Well, thank you all for joining this webinar on third-party data verification in Washington, D.C. Some of you may have attended last week's webinar with DOEE, so this material may be familiar, but we will also be taking a deeper dive into best practices and lessons learned with an actual third-party data verifier, Stephen Winter Associates. Let's see here. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. My name is Mary Thomas, and I'm an Associate Director with the Building Innovation Hub, also called the Hub. And I'm joined by Sean Fish and Iffat Ridwana with Stephen Winter Associates, who will share their expertise on this topic. So here is our run of show. I'll go through introductions and a brief overview of the Hub, as well as the district's sustainability goals and how benchmarking and verification tie in. And I'll turn it over to Sean and Iffat to dive into the details on third-party verification, and we'll end with audience Q&A. So please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A function of the Zoom and not the chat, and we'll try to answer them in writing as we go and hold some at the end for discussion. So now here's an overview of the Building Innovation Hub. We are a program of the national nonprofit called the Institute for Market Transformation, or IMT, which sits in the middle space between government and private sector on climate policy and implementation. The Hub supports the real estate industry and local communities in and around Washington, D.C., with efforts to improve building performance and the experience for those who live and work in them. We are a grantee of DOEE and work closely with DOEE's partners, DCSU and DC Green Bank. And we also coordinate with other district agencies and organizations. And what this slide does not show are our partnerships with numerous community organizations and local market leaders, including some of you attending this webinar. But up on the screen is my team, Teresa Bacchus as the director of the Hub, and Yolanda Bonner is the associate director of building performance for the Hub. They're both on this webinar, and so you may see them in the chat. And I'm representing the Hub today, but you can reach out to any of us with any questions. The Hub was created in part to support buildings in the DC area implement sustainable building policies like third-party verification with education, outreach, resources, and connections. We try to meet everyone where they're at while simultaneously pushing the sector towards innovative solutions. We convene meetings, create resources, give presentations like this one, and organize events to equip you with what you need to be successful and make it easier to act. The district has ambitious climate and sustainability goals to make DC the greenest, healthiest, and most livable city for all residents. And building performance is a big part of this, as buildings, as you can see here, have a huge impact on our quality of life, energy burden, communities, and the climate. The district has a vision to be carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2045. There are a few plans in place to make this happen, including the Sustainable DC Plan, Climate Ready DC, and Clean Energy DC Plan. And the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act of 2018 codified elements of these plans, including updating existing benchmarking regulations to include smaller buildings, and creating the new data verification requirement that we're talking about today. All of this will help us mitigate our impact on climate change over time. The district's sustainability plans tackle carbon emissions in every sector, but as you can see, because buildings account for over 70% of the district's greenhouse gas emissions, reducing the amount of energy used in buildings is paramount in order to making a difference in the city's climate impact. Benchmarking is a critical step in this effort by tracking a building's energy and water usage and using a standard metric to compare the building's performance against past performance and to its peers nationwide. These comparisons have been shown to drive energy efficiency upgrades and increase occupancy rates and property values. And verification of this data by a third party ensures that the building is evaluated fairly and accurately, which is critical information for building owners and occupants to better understand how their buildings are using resources and what can be done to make improvements. So I'll now turn it over to Sean to talk about third-party verification.
Thank you, Mary. give me a second here as I steal the remote. All right, so as Mary mentioned, my name is Sean Fish. I'm a sustainability director with Stephen Winter Associates, and I will be joined today by Iffat Ridwana, who will be walking everybody through the third-party verification process, including a sample scope of work. So our agenda for today's conversation is to just provide a brief overview of the third-party verification requirement, review that sample scope of work, identify issues that may come up within the third-party verification process, specific examples wherever possible, and then also what critical issues or items may be important for your particular building type. And then we'll also review the available resources and then have time at the end for Q&A. Just so everybody is aware, for the purposes of today's conversation, Iffat will be using we and you. And when we're saying we and you, we is the data verifier. So Iffat is serving as the data verifier in this case, and then you is the building ownership. Just so everybody's on the same page there. All right, so we're going to provide just a quick overview. Mary touched on this very briefly of the third-party verification requirement. As you are likely aware, right now in the district, all buildings over 25,000 square feet are required to benchmark. Buildings 50,000 square feet and above have been required to benchmark since about 2013. Buildings 50 or 25,000 square feet and above were required to benchmark beginning in 2022. The benchmarking report is due every year on April 1st. That is whether you're required to third-party verify or not. But every 3 years, all buildings will be required to have a third-party verification as part of their benchmarking submission. So that is this year. So benchmarking data is required to be third-party verified this year with last year's benchmarking data. Also, just an FYI, that buildings over 10,000 square feet are required to benchmark beginning next year with this year's data. So if you have smaller buildings, 10,000 square feet and above, be ready to begin benchmarking those as well. So again, third-party verification is required from an approved district verifier. Last week's webinar went into who can and cannot be an approved data verifier in pretty clear detail. So I definitely would recommend you check that out or go to the DOE FAQ for the third-party verification process. That is this resource down at the bottom of the screen. That FAQ is going to be very helpful for just about everybody. But just real briefly, the third party cannot be the owner of the building. It cannot be an employee of the owner or the building. And it also cannot be the benchmarking provider. So if you are already paying somebody or working with somebody else to be your benchmarking provider, that organization, a representative of that organization, cannot serve as the third-party verifier. The approved data verifier is an individual with a litany of licenses, credentials, or certifications. Again, all of those can be found on the DOE help desk website there. Real briefly, just kind of re-reviewing that timeline that I previously had discussed. Right now is when you need to be performing your third-party data verification process. Yes, we know that there are some issues with TEPCO and the aggregate meter data for multiple multifamily projects. And we're starting to see some of that data come in as of this morning for a few of the projects that we're working on. So that is exciting to see. But right now you need to be performing the third-party verification process, and then that is due with your benchmarking report on April 1st. Then next year and the following year, just regular benchmarking as you've done it historically. But again, that's all buildings 10,000 square feet and above beginning next year. And then for January 1st, 2027, you're going to repeat the process that you do this year. So now I'm going to hand it over to Iffat, who's going to walk you through a litany of items. And Iffat, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. Give me 1 second while I take the control. Perfect. So now that we have talked a little bit about what are the requirements for third-party data verification, let's talk about a sample scope of work and what is included in that. So helpfully, the Building Innovation Hub has already uploaded this sample scope of work as a part of a resource in their website. And if you have already attended DOE's webinar last week, this was also discussed in that how to use this sample scope of work to hire an approved data verifier. So the major sections in this scope of work are owner's responsibilities and then data review, or the task one. So owner's responsibilities outlines what you need as an owner to provide to your third-party verifier. What are the data that or the supporting documents that the verifier would need access to? And then task one, data review and the data review corrections, that talks about the verifier's responsibility in the scope of work. There are also some optional tasks in the scope of work, like detailed data review, on-site data review, and data correction that is not in the base scope. It will only trigger when the owner requests the data verifier to perform those tasks. And there are some of the assumptions in the scope of work that is already built in. And we should mention about those because I have talked about the base scope versus the optional tasks. So one of the assumptions that the scope of work makes is that the owner will be able to provide enough supporting documentation for the verifier to go over the data. If you have those data, then the verification process is pretty straightforward and it saves time and money for both owner and the verifier. Another assumption that the scope of work makes is that the portfolio manager entry is probably correct. And that is why we have the detailed data review and data correction as optional tasks. However, in practice, we have seen that there are errors in a lot of buildings portfolio manager entry. And if you have a minor error, it can be taken care of. But if this is a major error, it takes larger effort and it will hit those optional tasks. You can get this sample scope of work from the Building Innovation Hub's link in this resource. So this shows the flowchart of what I have just discussed. The task one, or the base scope, includes a data review and then the review correction and complete data verification checklist. Once you hire an approved data verifier, this is the verifier's responsibility to complete that checklist and after performing the data review. And then there are optional tasks built in that scope of work, which you can request as an owner to your verifier to perform. And those include the detailed data review, on-site data review, and data correction. Going forward, I will refer the scope of work in different tasks for this presentation. So now let's see what, on a high level, what is this process, how it is done, and who are the responsible organizations or people. So you have a building where you have some basic information, and then you get some information from your energy provider like Pepco or Washington Gas. Your benchmarking provider creates the Energy Star Portfolio Manager entry with all of those benchmarked data. As third-party verifier, we will need the access to that benchmark data or the portfolio manager entry. We will review those data, and then we will mention if there are discrepancies. If there are discrepancies and those are major, then it needs to be approved by DOE. Corrections need to be made, and then we will verify again to complete the third-party data verification. I will go into the details of each step in a bit. So firstly, what verifiers need access to? I have already mentioned we need access to building portfolio manager entry for your building, and you can exchange data with our portfolio manager account and share those data for us to verify. Secondly, building drawings. It can be architectural, mechanical, and electrical drawings. Third, the space use type, use breakdown documentation that will show what are the different types of spaces in your building. Utility metering information and meter lists that includes aggregated meter list and then Pepco meter list for your property. And lastly, as Sean have already mentioned, 2023 utility data, because this is what we are verifying for the verification process in 2024. So how can you collect and provide good supporting data to your verifier? As I have already mentioned, building drawings are one of the key elements that we would require you to provide us as a supporting data. Building drawings can tick a lot of the boxes. For example, it will have different information on your common spaces, on your supporting spaces. It will have the details of your floor area and then space use type breakdown as well. So if you have good architectural drawing, we can go from there and do a lot of the verification work from there. However, there are a lot of cases where we do not have building drawings. It may be lost, the building may be very old, or it may have changed ownership during last 5 or 10 years. In that case, there are some alternatives, and those alternatives are also acceptable by DOE as a part of the supporting documentation. So that can be your survey documents that has consistent floor plans, for example, your BOMA survey or your ALTA survey. Or if you have any other documentation that aligns with Energy Star Portfolio Manager information on how to do the gross floor area calculations, we can use those documentation as well. You would also need to provide us your utility metering information that should include all of your on-site meters, and then copies of your utility bills, and then aggregated meter lists from your property. So now that you have shared all of those supporting documentation or alternatives with your verifier, the verifier then starts the process. So as verifiers, first, we will do the data review. Now, there are a lot of data that is inputted in the portfolio manager entry. There are some major field that needs to be verified as a part of this process, in addition to all of the other information, and those are directly affecting your building's performance, your building's Energy Star score. So the first one is your gross floor area in your portfolio manager, along with the supporting documentation. Then the space breakdown, and lastly, the 2023 portfolio manager utility metering information against your utility information from your energy provider. If we see that there are some discrepancies, we will propose the corrections for those discrepancies. There is also a supplemental worksheet for data verification from DOE's third-party data verification FAQs, which we have been using to verify all the fields that are mentioned in that worksheet as a part of the process. And on the right of the slide, you can see that this is in the base scope for the verifier's responsibilities. So now let's say you have some discrepancies in your data in your portfolio manager. Then the next steps would be to prepare supporting documentation to correct those errors, and then submit that benchmarking data correction ticket to DOE. Now, this is in the sample scope of work, not in the base scope of work for the verifier. This is an optional task. If, as an owner, you request your verifier to perform this, we can do that on your request, and it will only trigger once you have requested that. And there are certain fields that I have mentioned, and I will show you in the next slide, that will need approval from DOE before you can make any changes to your portfolio manager entry. So the benchmarking data correction ticket needs to be submitted from the Beam portal, where there is a specific benchmarking data correction ticket from the new tickets, and you would need to submit the documentation and then the corrections to DOE. So now that we have found some errors and there are benchmarking data correction tickets, what are the next steps? How to make corrections in Portfolio Manager? Now, this is important to mention that if your benchmarking data or your Portfolio Manager has some errors, this specific step, the data correction, this is mandatory in the verification process. Whoever does this, completes this specific step, this needs to be done before any of the verification review and completion can happen. For the scope of work, this is optional, but as I have mentioned, there are certain fields that requires approval from DOE. Those are gross floor area, energy and water data, property use detail, and other or multiple categories. Now you can see all of these fields, they directly affect your Energy Star score or your energy use intensity inside. So that needs to go through DOE first before you can make any changes. So once DOE has approved the changes for the major fields, as an owner, you need to contact your benchmarking provider to request those changes and the portfolio manager to be updated. Your benchmarking provider will then go and make the changes in the portfolio manager. If at any point of time your benchmarking provider does not have capacity to make the changes, please talk to your verifier. But as I have mentioned, this is not in the base scope, and it may require additional scope or fee for the verifier to do the data correction. However, I'll mention again this specific step: the data correction needs to happen if there are discrepancy in your portfolio manager entry before the verifier can go back and review the corrections. So the last part for the process is the review corrections from the verifier. This is in the base scope. And once you have made the changes in your portfolio manager with DOE's approval, or your benchmarking provider has done that, then you'll communicate that with your verifier. And as verifiers, we will go in and we will review the corrections that were made to the portfolio manager entry. Once we see that everything aligns with the supporting documentation and the portfolio manager input, then we will complete the data verification checklist. And then we will provide that checklist to the client. And that wraps up the base scope for the third-party verification process from the scope of work. So what is the role of the data verification checklist? Why do we need this? Who completes this? So this is specifically your verifier's responsibility to complete the data verification checklist. We get it from the building portfolio manager entry in the goals tab, and in the left-hand side, you can see that we can generate the data verification checklist. Once all of the fields or data in your Energy Star portfolio manager has been corrected, or it aligns with the documentation, then we will generate this checklist and we will input necessary information, like this should say that this was a single year verification until December 31st, 2023. And then we will sign and stamp with our specific credentials that Sean mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation. And then we will provide the signed copy to you. Now, the owner and the designee must keep this signed copy of the checklist and all of the supporting documentation in their record until the next third-party data verification cycle, that is in 2027. However, this is not something that is required to be submitted to DOE. This remains in owner's record, and we as verifiers will provide that with you to you once we have completed the verification process. So if the checklist is not submitted, then how do you submit the verification to the DOE? First of all, this is owner's responsibility to make sure that verification is submitted to DOE. And the way it should be done is you can add the verification details from the details tab in portfolio manager entry. There is a field where you can add verification information, and you need to input the information like who verified your building, what was their credentials, etc. And then you save and submit this to DOE. This is where the verification process is completed once you have submitted that to DOE. So please talk to your verifier and be on the same page on who fills this out, when this is filled out, when this is submitted. Because if you do not submit this on time, your verification is incomplete and you will be in violation of the requirement of third-party verification. And this is where the third-party verification process ends, and this verification is submitted to DOE to complete this whole process. So as I have mentioned, if you have your data correct in your portfolio manager, your gross floor area makes sense with the supporting documentation, you have all of your space type correct, your energy consumption aligns with your bills, then the verification process is straightforward. We can review all of it. We can complete the checklist, and we can provide that to you so that you can submit the verification to DOE. However, we have seen a lot of different examples of when your portfolio manager entry is not correct. For example, this building, it is currently benchmarked as the one in the left, where it is a very small portion of the whole building. When we started verifying the documentation, we saw that from the metering configuration, that the correct benchmarking should be the right one. You can see that there is a big difference between the gross floor area, and it will definitely have a big difference in terms of energy consumption and energy use intensity. So in that case, as verifiers, before any of the benchmarking data is corrected, we cannot do any more verification on this specific property. Once every data is corrected, then we'll have to go in and then do the verification process. And you can see why we would need additional support and additional effort to complete these types of verification where there are different types of roadblocks. Now let's see some of the examples of what we have come across, what are the common errors, etc. So we have come across good buildings where your Energy Star portfolio manager entry and your supporting data aligns well. So for example, for this building, we received the floor plans, we received rent rolls, we received part of 2023 utility bills, and we verified that all of the Energy Star portfolio manager inputs for these buildings were aligning with the documentation. So then once we receive the rest of the 2023 utility bills, we can complete the verification and provide the checklist to the client. And there are a lot of good examples where it is a very straightforward process for both us and for the owners. But there are also some common errors and issues that we have come across. One of the most common error, I would say, is a gross floor area discrepancy, where it can be of different types. Some of them are missing parking floors, some of them are missing common areas or supporting areas from the main space use. Some of them has multiple. For example, for this building, we received the portfolio manager entry access, and then we also received the supporting documentation like building drawings. On the right, you can see that there are parking floors in this building, but on the left, the portfolio manager entry for this building was something like where there is just multifamily housing and no parking. So that is the first issue that needs to be corrected. The second one was in the parking area, there are supporting spaces like equipment room, storage room, etc. And all of those supporting spaces, they need to be accounted in the main space use type. For this case, it was multifamily. But all of those areas were not reported inside the multifamily housing gross floor area. So that is the second issue that needs to be corrected. And we have come across multiple examples where we have seen some sort of gross floor area discrepancy in the buildings. And one thing to mention here is that you cannot use your rentable floor area directly in Portfolio Manager as your gross floor area square footage. The next one that we have seen is meter list issues. So sometimes we receive no information on aggregated meter list, and as a part of the verification, we need to look at that. Sometimes there are missing meter information for some of the meters. For example, if your building has 100 apartments and all of them are individually metered, then your meter list should include at least 100 apartments meter numbers along with some house meters maybe. But we have seen meter lists with maybe just 95 meter numbers. And so we know that there are missing metering information. We have also seen the PEPCO aggregated meter list to be inaccurate in case of some properties. Now, I have mentioned before that we also look at the PEPCO meter list as a part of the verification process. We have also experienced some wait time in receiving the PEPCO meter list from the owners or the benchmarking providers. As verifiers, it is important for us to mention that we will prefer to have a certain cutoff time to receive that information. after which it will be very challenging for us to complete all of the verification of the PEPCO meter list and then complete the checklist as well. So if you have any concerns on the timeline as owners, please reach out to DOE and they can direct you better on this one. Another common error that we have come across was metering configuration and benchmarking error. I have already showed an example of that in the previous slide. So this mainly occurs in garden style properties. The garden style properties are the multifamily properties where you have one property, but you have smaller multiple buildings there. It could be low rise, it could be high rise, or it could be mid rise, but you have multiple buildings in one property. And usually the way the garden style properties are benchmarked, or the correct way it should be benchmarked, is based on the least common denominator, which can be your metering configuration, or it can be your equipment like heat pumps or boilers, etc. So for example, for this building, let's say we have 5 smaller separate buildings in one property, and it is benchmarked as 1. And once we start the verification, we get all of the information on the metering configuration, your equipments, etc. Once we start looking at those, we see that all of these 5 buildings, they have separate electric and gas meters, and they have separate equipment like boilers, chillers for each individual building. However, when we look at the water meter services, we see that one water meter serves 2 buildings and another serves the rest of the buildings. So in this case, your least common denominator is your water meters, and your benchmarking should be based on that. So correct benchmarking should be 2 properties instead of 1. And you can see from here that there are a lot of roadblocks before we can even start completing the verification for the separate properties, and it needs to be split into 2 before any of the verification can happen. So what may be crucial for your building type? And this is not an exclusive list. This is not just a field where you need to be very careful about in your building, but this is where we have seen most of the errors occur. So for multifamily apartment buildings, we have seen that the gross floor area and then aggregated meter list are the most common places where the issues have been found. For multifamily garden style, as I have shown in just the previous slide, metering configuration or least common denominator finding that is very crucial for these types of building. Then office buildings, the ground floor plan with retail spaces. If you have office building with larger retail spaces in your ground floor, there are a lot of things to consider in terms of like what should be included in Portfolio Manager, what can be excluded if those are submitted or not. So that specific area needs to be taken care of for your Portfolio Manager entry. And lastly, for mixed use type, where your space use breakdown comes into play, and you need to figure out what is the main space use type versus the other space use type that should be included in your Portfolio Manager. There are a lot of available resources as well on benchmarking and third-party verification if you want to further look into it and do some more research by yourself. So DOE has benchmarking and then third-party verification FAQs. Building Innovation Hub has a how-to guide as well as the sample scope of work we talked about. Energy Star also has good articles on benchmarking, energy space use type breakdowns, or what are the spaces that are eligible for Energy Star score. So lastly, the takeaways from the whole process and what we have seen in practice. First is third-party verification is a requirement. So if you have a building which is more than 25,000 square foot, you need to do third-party verification by April 1st. And as owners, you need to start as soon as possible, because as I have shown that there are a lot of roadblocks that can happen along the way. So the more time, the better. And we roughly have 2 months from today. So if we have more time, if you start as soon as possible, you'll have more runway to complete this. Be diligent with providing the data and documentation. If your verifier gets all of the supporting documentation quickly from you, they can start on the verification process. Otherwise, they'll have to wait from your side to get all of the data and the documentation. Be prompt on communication with your verifier and provider. If your verifier asks a question to you, or if there is a data correction that needs to happen and you need to talk to your provider, please do that promptly so that you can finish the verification in time. And lastly, looking into the resources and reaching out to questions if you have any. It can be to DOE, it can be to Building Innovation Hub, but please reach out if you have questions. And that wraps up the presentation from our side. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. I'm gonna put the screen back up. Although I think you all can see my lovely background. So that's the National Arboretum, if you all are familiar with that, favorite place. All right. Okay, so thank you, Sean and Iffat, for walking us through the process and best practices. We've gotten a lot of questions in the Q&A and really appreciate everyone thinking through this and being diligent with your questions. Before we walk through those questions or revisit some of the ones that are good to highlight here, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that once you exit the Zoom, there will be a survey. So please do fill out the survey. We will also be sending out an email with the survey and the recording and additional resources to help you all. And as we noted before, DOEE also had a webinar last week, and their webinar is posted on their FAQ page, which we've referenced here as well. So, Sean, do you want to take us through some of the good Q&A?
Absolutely. So I've tried my best to answer a lot of your questions in real time. I haven't been able to get to all of them, and some of them I felt were important to answer over the webinar. So one of the common questions that we received, a version of it came from Mark Burke, which is many buildings do not have plans available. Will DOB be on board to respond to data verifiers' requests for plans? Are the DC tax real estate records able to be used alternately? The short answer to that is if you don't have physical copies of the plans, you can check DOB's website to see if they do. I can put that in the chat. Typically, though, we would recommend that the owner collect these drawings since there will be more long-term use for the drawings as well. But generally speaking, DOEE, who's responsible for the benchmarking, does not allow OTR documentation to be used as a substitute for GFA. So we would recommend that, and I think Iffat did touch on this, if there's a BOMA survey available, you can use that. There are alternatives that can be done, including walking the building to get a better sense of the square footage. Iffat, are there other alternatives that I am leaving out?
So as I have mentioned, if you can maintain your measurement that aligns with portfolio manager, Energy Star portfolio managers documentation and instructions, then that can also be accepted according to the website or the FAQs that DOE has provided. So we can also look into that.
And one thing that was just thrown in our own internal chat over here is all the surveys are available for garden style apartments as well. Will you have access to the slides? Yes, slides will be available, as will the recording of this at some point. Mary, I'm not sure what the timeline for that is.
Within a week, probably sooner than that.
Great. What contact can help me link Pepco data to my EPA Energy Star portfolio account? I created a Pepco account, but don't know how to link the data. I would recommend working with a benchmarking provider if you have issues with that, or checking out where you can do it on the Pepco website. It can definitely be a complicated process. There's multiple steps involved. But yes, benchmarking provider should know all of the steps in order to be able to link all of your utility accounts directly to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to slide through here, see what other ones we've got. How much is the fee to hire a verifier? We've gotten that a couple of times. I'm going to tell you that it is going to vary, verifier to verifier, building to building, depending on the size and complexity of your building, depending on the quality of the data, all of that. So I would definitely recommend that that you reach out to multiple qualified verifiers and review carefully their scope and their fees, and make the determination that's best for you. Good question for DOE as to what is the expected turnaround time for data correction tickets. Last year, tickets took upwards of 4 to 6 months, beginning in March. Hopefully, they won't be taking that long, obviously. But none of us are representatives of DOE, so unfortunately, I don't have the ability to answer that question. If anybody from DOE is on and would like to answer that in the chat, we're more than welcome to. Okay, sorry. There are quite a few questions here that are more directed at DOE. Oh, the chat is not open according to Teresa. My apologies, Teresa. So DOE will not be able to answer that, it looks like. Sorry, but there are a few other questions involving just kind of the April 1st deadline, when most other cities, state jurisdictions allow an annual benchmarking in May or June. Great question. That is the DOE deadline. That's what I can say. All right, sorry, I'm just trying to read through here, making sure that I haven't missed too much. With the hundreds of buildings that need to submit verification and the number of providers available and the time they need to verify the data, is it even mathematically possible to get all of them done? We surely aren't going to hire a company until we look into this more. There are only 60 days remaining. That is a great question, great point. One thing that DOE would like everybody to understand is that verifiers do not have to be local. It is not strictly a local thing. It is anybody who has the credentials that are listed on the DOE website. So we would definitely note that you can go beyond the DC area, though, as a local provider, and as the IMT, as the Building Innovation Hub is a proponent of local businesses, obviously, we know our buildings here a lot better than someone else. Let's see here. Mary or Iffat, any questions that stuck out to you as I'm going through some of these?
So we actually do have someone from DOEE on, Joanna Saunders, and I think we're able to give her the necessary permissions to speak. So.
Oh, great.
All right, Joanna, you're on.
So I don't know if there's any specific questions that you wanted to throw our way. I know you mentioned a couple, but if there were any specific that you wanted DOE to answer.
Sure. There was one, there were a couple from the chat that basically said it would be great to have a list of verifiers on the DOE website. I know that has come up in the past.
Yeah, so as the regulatory body, we are not going to have a list of providers, as we have to remain as neutral as possible. And so that's why we have pointed to the existing resources that are available, both through the EPA Portfolio Manager site and then, of course, the Building Innovation Hub site. We will not be curating or posting a list on our website. As the government, as the regulatory body, that is not our place to recommend specific providers.
And if I could jump in there as someone from the Building Innovation Hub, and we've gotten this question too. We don't have a specific list as well, but we do have a find a vendor portal where if someone has a particular job opportunity, they can send it through us and we can send it out to our database. And you know, and we do our best to filter for the criteria that is listed on the DOEE website for third-party data verifiers, but we don't independently vet them. There's also the EPA has a list of licensed contractors that that we can include a link in that in our follow-up as well, because that's also very helpful.
Joanna, another one that I think it would be helpful for you to answer as a DOEE representative is if a building owner does not have drawings or a BOMA report, how can the square footage be verified? What are you accepting right now?
If there are absolutely no plans, then probably an on-site measurement would be the best way to ensure that the building is being measured within EPA portfolio manager guidance.
Can you respond? There was a question earlier about the turnaround time for any changes, you know, any change requests. What is the current turnaround time for?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a like exact timeline, like within 30 days or weeks, whatever it may be. We have processed a lot of them. So as of now, you know, we don't have as much of a backlog. We received over 400 last year in a very short period of time, which is why some of them took a while. And also we were developing our guidance for what GFA documentation could be accepted. And since we've got that a bit more robust and very clearly laid out, it's, you know, a bit more cut and dry as to if what is submitted meets our standards for, you know, if there's a request to change GFA. All I can say is, you know, the sooner that you get it in, the better, before April 1. You know, because if something is submitted on the morning of April 1st, we can't guarantee that it's going to get responded to and approved by later that day. So the sooner that you can get in any correction tickets that would impact the 2023 data or your verification, the better. And we are working very diligently to make sure that we at least respond to everything in a timely manner and notify whoever is submitting the data correction of any, you know, potential gaps or discrepancies in what was submitted in order for us to be able to process it.
We've got one more. I think I've got the answer to this, but I just love your confirmation, Joanna. What type of data corrections need to be approved by DOEE before the building owner makes any corrections in Energy Star Portfolio Manager? My recollection on that is it's any correction that would impact your Energy Star score going back to 2019.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Even more generally, anything that impacts your historic reporting. So if it's just that a verifier came in and flagged that the, you know, a single monthly entry for your 2023 energy bill was misentered and needed to be corrected, that's not something that DOEE needs to be notified of. That's only impacting 2023. It can just be fixed before it's even sent to us. On the flip side, things that would impact not only your 2023 data, but all past reports are things that are somewhat immobile, as in your gross floor area. If it's a multifamily building, the number of residential units and bedrooms, you know, things that we wouldn't necessarily expect to see change year over year. And so anything that's being updated and that will therefore impact all of your past benchmarking reports, that's something that does need to be submitted to DOEE. And I mean, the good news about verification is if these things are caught during verification, the documentation needed to support it should be pretty straightforward and pretty easy to process. And I will also state for other use details that might impact Energy Star score, but might just be in a single year. For example, an office building that changed their occupancy in just 2023, and that gets updated. That's not something that we need to be flagged of. But again, if you're making historic updates to all of your details, it's in our regulations that DOE does need to be notified.
Great, thank you. Where can we submit for an extension if data correction tickets are not closed before April 1st?
So we don't have a form. The April 1 deadline is in the law and therefore fairly strict, I would say. You know, if there is a very unique circumstance for which a building is unable to submit their benchmarking and verification, I mean, you can always reach out to us, but I can't guarantee any sort of extension to April 1, and would just reiterate that that is the deadline that was written in the law and fairly immovable.
Thank you, Joanna. Mary, have you seen any more come in that I might have missed out on?
We have one from Stephanie who asked, any tips on keeping track of discrepancies and corrections found in large portfolio of buildings, same building owner? The way we have experienced this is if we have some sort of shared document or tracker that is between owner, probably your benchmarking provider, and the verifier, which will help you keep update of all of the statuses of all of your buildings, and that's shared so both the parties can update the statuses once any discrepancy happen or any corrections happen. That has been helpful in terms of keeping track for larger portfolios in our experience. Anything else that you want to add, Sean, as tips?
I think you nailed it there. All right, Mary, I think we probably have time for one or two more, huh?
Yes, that's right. And any questions that are in the chat here, you know, we have a record of this, and so we'll try to respond in writing for anything that we don't have time to get to. Let's see.
Mark Burke has a good point here. When there are no plans, most data verifiers are not architectural surveyors for surveys to confirm square footage. Shouldn't this instead be an owner task to complete and keep for future use themselves? I'm going to go ahead and say, if you wish to take that on and hire somebody who has the credentials to do that and maintain that documentation, and then share that with the verifier after the fact, that should be sufficient, and then the verifier will work with DOE to file that ticket, or the owner.
Yeah.
I can also even tack on that it will be very helpful because verification is a requirement every 3 years. And so in our view, if you've got good documentation once, you should have good documentation forever. And so that should not be a hurdle in future verification years.
Yes, and I also want to add to the this makes me think of the scope of work in general, because, you know, it's written a certain way, but it's obviously, you know, it's a Word document, it's customizable for every building owner's needs. You know, no need not to customize it, however is appropriate for you all. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. And I'm going to go with, who is responsible for raising tickets for corrections that were flagged by the verifier? The owner, benchmarking company, or verifier? Iffat, I think you touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but it can go in any number of directions there, and I'll let you answer that one.
So once your verifier has flagged any of the issues, this is, as owner, your responsibility to provide documentation and then submit tickets. However, in the scope of work, there is an optional task where you as an owner can ask your verifier to submit that benchmarking data correction ticket. That is not in the base scope, and that requires additional fee and support from the verifier. So that answer is pretty open-ended in terms of how you would want to approach it, but it should be mentioned that as an owner, this is your responsibility to submit the ticket and make sure that is approved by DOE, and then do the data correction.
Okay. Well, we just want to thank everyone. We had a a lot of interested people, and we hope that this webinar was helpful. And as we've noted before, we will be sending around the presentation, the recording, and some links to helpful resources to continue through this process over the next couple of months. So many thanks to Iffat and Sean for your detailed presentation. And also thanks to Joanna for jumping on as our special guest to answer some of these DOEE specific questions. So yeah, and again, if anyone please has any questions, you can all reach out to me. My email address is now in the chat. So and you can always reach out to us through our website as well. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll close out the webinar. So thanks, everyone.